Welcome and good afternoon to everyone. I hope you're enjoying gridCONNEXT. Just as a joke, it was a banner day for me. Not only are we enjoying gridCONNEXT, but I also am wearing lipstick and my dining room table is clean. So welcome to our panel on how grids enable the clean energy transition. We've assembled a mix of executives from coast to coast with a variety of backgrounds and different companies. My name is Michele Tihami, and I'm country manager for DNV-GL. Before we get started, I'd like to set the table for you of what that clean energy transition might look like in 2050. These numbers come from our report, the Energy Transition Outlook, which is a report we produce annually. So number one, rapid electrification. We're forecasting electricity share to more than double by 2050. Number two, the electric generation will be dominated by solar and by wind. And obviously, we've already seen signs that coal will continue to decline. Number three, EV share of passenger car vehicles will reach 50% in 2040 and 77% in 2050. This assumes large EVs with a long range, AKA large batteries, AKA large grid impact. And lastly, with declining storage cost, we're predicting significant growth in utility scale energy storage. But we don't have to look to 2050 to see the increasing numbers of states, utilities, and C&I customers making commitments to greenhouse gas emissions. All of these factors will drive substantial change to the grid. And we're going to discuss that and so much more today with my very distinguished panel. So I'd like to invite them to introduce themselves and give a brief description of what's happening in their jurisdiction around the clean energy picture. So let's start east to west, and Aftab, I'll ask you to kick it off.
Thank you, Michele. So I'm Aftab Khan. I'm the Senior Vice President of Engineering at Eversource Energy. So those of you who aren't familiar with Eversource, we are New England's largest energy delivery company. Our service territory is in Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. We are an electric, water, and gas utility, and recently we've entered into a partnership with the Danish company Ørsted to develop some offshore wind farms. So we are very focused as a company on enabling a clean energy transformation. As Michele mentioned, a number of states in the country are really driving towards this greenhouse gas emission reduction goal, and our states are quite active in that regard, particularly Massachusetts and Connecticut. So, they have the stated goal, like I think many other states, to achieve an 80% reduction by 2050 based on 1990 levels. And then, depending on the state, there's some intermediate targets, and that has led to a lot of things that incentives to drive growth in distributed energy resources like solar, recent pushes to get some behind the meter energy storage onto the system. I mentioned offshore wind. So our states, particularly Massachusetts and Connecticut and New England, have done procurement of offshore wind and other clean energy resources. So we have a big push in our region to get clean energy onto our system, and it's really caused us to think about the role that we play to enable that transformation in the network.
Thank you so much, Aftab. I know you are full of activities at the moment. So let me switch next to Texas, and my former colleague, Julienne, do you want to introduce yourself and give us a picture of what's going on at CenterPoint?
I'd be glad to, Michele. Thank you very much. My name is Julienne Sugarek. I'm the Vice President of Power Delivery Solutions for CenterPoint Energy. For those of you who may not be familiar with CenterPoint, we are a gas and electric utility. Our electric operation is located in both the southwest portion of Indiana, and then we are also serve the greater Houston area. The markets are very different, and so our strategies and how we're assisting with the clean energy transition looks very different in each of those territories. So first, I'll talk a little bit about Indiana. So we are vertically integrated in that market, and so the focus of our efforts there have really been on a generation transition. So we incorporated feedback from our stakeholders through our most recent IRP process and developed a generation portfolio that would reduce coal generation by 80% by 2025. And so we'll be retiring coal generation and bringing on solar and wind in the next 4 to 5 years. So that's some exciting work that's going on there. Given the nature of our conversation and specifically the grid topic, the activities that we have going on in Houston, I think will be of particular interest for this audience. So in Texas, as I mentioned, it's a very different market. It's deregulated. And in that market, we operate as a transmission and distribution service provider. And the view that we take with the grid in Houston is that we're a platform for the clean energy future. And we heard a lot of that this morning if you had the opportunity to tune into Mary Ann's keynote session, where she talked about taking a similar approach to the grid and its role in the clean energy future. And as we look at what we can do as the transmission distribution service provider to help in this space, there's really two aspects of what we can do. One is resiliency. And we heard Tracy Warren talk a little bit about that in her breakout session yesterday. And there's 3 pieces of that are key strategies for us. And one is building capacity. Another is condition-based replacements for our infrastructure. And then also evolving analytics and how we can use that to be more proactive in helping make sure that we identify issues, preferably before they occur, but as soon as possible afterwards, because we recognize how important electricity is when we have, especially when we have this many people working and learning from home. The other aspect is grid modernization. So at CenterPoint, we have a fantastic foundation to build on. We were an early adopter of AMI and the Advanced Distribution Management System, and we installed about 15% of our system has intelligent grid switching device capabilities in it, which is a really useful thing in a place like Houston, where we are prone to lightning and we've got some areas that have a lot of vegetation. In recent times, we've really focused on our interconnection processes. So trying to improve those, make the customer experience associated with those a little easier. We have a lot of large scale renewables that are starting to be built in the Houston area. So over the next 2 years, we have 11 major projects, and we expect to see about 3.5 gigawatts of renewable power come onto the system. So that aspect of interconnection is very important to us. But we still have a lot of work to do in this space, and the areas where we're really focusing in on are improving visibility to the grid and using the information or the data that we get from that visibility to create actionable information so that we can improve our operating capabilities. And then, of course, an important piece of this too is how we evolve our planning models so that we can forecast, how we need to evolve our system as we see more adoption of this new generation of assets.
Terrific, thank you. And I know we'll get more into detail on all of those topics. Reiko, why don't you pick up next? And I know you have quite a challenge in front of you.
Sure, thank you. So my name is Reiko Kerr. I am the Senior Assistant General Manager for the Power System for the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. We are the largest municipally owned utility in the country, serving both water and power. We are also vertically integrated. We own over 25% of the transmission in the state, covering 6 or 7 western states. We have a peak load of 6,500 megawatts, And currently we have about 1,000 megawatts of wind installed, and as well as another 1,200 megawatts of solar and about 1,100 megawatts of pumped hydro. So we have a long history of aggressively adopting renewable energy as well as addressing greenhouse gas and environmental goals. So some of the exciting things happening at DWP and as well as California, we have Senate Bill 100 that requires not only LADWP, but the whole state to have 60% renewable portfolio standard by 2030, as well as 100% carbon-free resources by 25. Not to be satisfied with that, Mayor Garcetti also has the LA's Green New Deal. So we took that a step further to add an interim target of 55% by 2025, as well as 80% by 2036. And if you add greenhouse gas free resources such as hydro, large hydro, and nuclear, we will be 97% clean energy greenhouse gas free by 2036. In addition, we have a number of coastal power plants that are under what's called the once through cooling, which requires that we come off once through cooling no later than 2030. So we're working on the plan to address that. It impacts about over 1,600 megawatts of coastal plants. And we also have what we call the LA 100. So we have a multi-year study with the National Renewable Energy Lab that is looking at what type of investments are needed to get to 100%. So we have the Clean Grid LA, which is looking at like the 10-year time frame for the coastal plants. And then we have the longer term horizon with the NREL study, a comprehensive study that looks at generation, transmission, distribution, power flows, reliability, electrification, distributed energy resources, as well as the impact to local jobs, and ensuring that environmental justice communities are the first beneficiaries of this transition. So we're looking at a range of targets and a range of scenarios, and what are the costs of the various scenarios. And what we found is there's a huge range that can go from 50 billion to 80 billion. So where we are today, last year, we were at 34% renewable portfolio that served our customers. If you add our greenhouse gas resources, we were over 50%, which for some areas in the Pacific Northwest is not too exciting, but for LA and Southern California, where you're largely an arid geography, that's desert-like, that we've added a lot of landscaping to, that is a pretty impressive record. And in addition to that, LA is also the largest solar city in the country for 2017, 18, and 19. Because of all the solar and rooftops that we've adopted behind the meter. I'll stop there.
Perfect, thank you. And Jeff, tell us what's going on in the Pacific Northwest.
Well, hi, thanks, Michelle. I'm sort of the odd man out here in that I don't work for a utility. I work for the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, which is funded by utilities in the 4-state area, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana. And our focus is on something called market transformation for energy efficiency. So I'm on the customer side of the meter, primarily working to develop new technologies that can take advantage of a smarter and more enabled grid that we can work together to solve the problems of the future. I've been doing this work in the energy efficiency space for over 40 years, and I've seen a lot of transformations of our energy sector. In the Northwest, as you all know, we have a lot of hydro. We still have a lot of hydro. More in any given year, about half of our entire loads are served by hydro system. And if we have a good water year, it could be as much as 2/3 of our electricity needs provided. So we've already got a big start on a clean energy future from that perspective. Washington State in our region has taken a very aggressive stance towards moving that even to a more clean future. By 2025 in Washington State, it has to be carbon neutral. By 2035, basically all coal-fired power plants and fossil fuels are going to be transitioned out. And other states are following suit. Oregon is not far behind. Idaho Power's made a commitment to clean energy by 2045. And so we're beginning to see movement in that direction, even in advance of those deadlines. We're closing coal-fired power plants. Most of our coal fleet will be offline probably before 2030. It'll be replaced by natural gas and renewables. And the question now is, how much natural gas are we going to add? And so that's the scenario now. And the Northwest, as Reiko knows, is connected to the Southwest. So we have very much a connectivity there that enables some additional intra-regional power transfers between winter and summer that could help both regions get to the clean energy goals faster than otherwise. I think that's maybe the one other piece of this that we're all struggling with, I think, is a big debate is happening right now in the Northwest around defining resource adequacy for our power system. What reliability criteria do we need to achieve under a clean scenario? And if we meet it with just straight additions of solar and wind, let's say, for those last 100 hours or even 10 hours of critical peak, we're going to be spending an awful lot of capital. And so the real challenge we're wrestling with is, how do we, achieve economic optimization here, this clean energy transition? And we believe in the Northwest that there's a big role to play for the end use side of the meter, and interactivity between the end use and the clean energy supply on the generation side. I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Jeff. So, curiosity. The picture that I painted in 2050, how do you guys approach that? Are you worried about 2050? Do you have just enough to manage by 2030? Where do you even begin planning?
I can talk a little bit about some of the challenges we're dealing with. So as I said, we've had, particularly a state like Massachusetts, that's, been very friendly towards accelerating growth of DERs and, incentive schemes that have been out there. So, it's led to, a fast growth of solar in pockets of our system where land is cheap. And that's oftentimes not the place where our infrastructure is the best to support that level of growth. So, I would say it's been a bit of a learning curve, for us and, for our regulators to, figure out what the right way to meet this future is. I think the incentives and the approach taken was good to jumpstart it, but, we're having a lot of discussions about, what's the right way to, maybe have a little bit more of a coordinated plan, or maybe, adjust some of the incentives to, maybe drive the DER growth in parts of the system that could accommodate it a bit more. But that's just one example of, I would say, what we're working on to try to meet that ultimate future objective.
Yeah, so Michele, I'll go ahead and jump in here too. I talked about some of the modeling we're doing, and I think how you've laid out 2050 is very much aligned what we're thinking about for the future. So there are a couple things that I think are really, really important. I think Julienne talked about resiliency. So that's something that has really kept us up thinking, because we have such a history of a reliable system, because we have our gas generation, dispatchable generation, flexible generation where it is locally. The other point Aftab made on the location of infrastructure, obviously LA is a large load center, highly urban, a lot of population. Our infrastructure is very old, so it also has to be replaced. You can't really upgrade that very easily when it's downtown and underground without significant disruption. So when you're talking about going to 100%, and when you talk about the large loads that are coming from electrification, that is really important. And as we shift off the once through cooling resources, we shift off coal. We have one remaining coal asset. We've already gotten out of 3. And we get rid of that once through cooling generation. It's really important that we keep an eye on resiliency. Everyone knows how to measure reliability. Resiliency, not so much. And a perfect example, we have over 10,000 megawatts of installed capacity. And October of last year, California is just being ravaged with wildfires. And we had one last year when loads were low. We were only about 3,300 megawatts, but we lost 3 transmission import lines. Had we not had generation where it exists, we would have likely blacked out a third of the city. And as you look to electrify everything, where your entire economy, safety, water treatment, distance learning, things we've learned during COVID, everything revolves around a reliable supply of power. So making sure you do this in a deliberative way is very important. Another thing we learned, you mentioned energy storage. So one of the solutions, many people advocated for, just replace those plants with storage. Well, if you do that in basin, you're going to be charging those units with gas, which doesn't really support the goal of getting to greenhouse gas, and it will be wildly expensive. And a big piece of this is cost. We have our 3, prongs of our stool for cost, reliability, and environmental sustainability. But cost is very important, and we have a large percentage of our population that live in economically challenged or disadvantaged communities, and COVID has only exacerbated that. So timing is everything. I know, climate change requires an urgent response, but at the end of the day, your customers have to pay for this. And so understanding what the trade-offs on those are. And one final point is we're going through massive change. And because this system is so complex, it's related to many other systems, whether that's the water system, the gas system, the telecommunication system. Any one of those pieces has an issue, and it can have significant disruptions to your reliability, not to mention cybersecurity and what that does with the mass deployment of all these devices. And so it's important that as we do this, we can't look at this. I think we've seen this with the recent blackouts we had over the summer in a traditional planning way that we've always done it historically. And it requires that we understand the modeling and understand the limitations of modeling and what the outputs to minimize the unintended consequences that will happen if we don't do this in a deliberative fashion.
Jeff or Julienne, I didn't know if you guys wanted to comment.
I think that both summed it up very well. If there was one word that I would use to help describe kind of the approach and the planning process that we're taking, it's agile. It has to be, because the space is evolving so quickly. And, so we're focused on the resiliency aspects, the building capacity, the addressing the aging infrastructure. So kind of the foundational elements of this, and you have to consistently monitor the environment to see what technology solutions are available, understand the evolving, customer expectations, as well as, the concerns around climate, and try to balance those in a productive way and a responsible way with that cost element. We talk about the triple constraint of project management between scope, time, and cost, but we have the same triple constraint here between, reliability, the renewables goals, and then cost. So striking that balance is something that we have to be mindful of, and that may mean that plans evolve as we get closer to 2050.
This kind of begs the question, opportunities and challenges, right, for both internal, because you can imagine processes and even operations and how people interact are going to have to be re-examined, and then external, in terms of, how are you engaging with stakeholders or your regulators, etc. Anyone want to share what they've already conceived or what's already in motion?
Well, I can talk a little bit about what we're doing. So we're unfortunately a little bit of a disadvantage to some of our peer utilities in that we don't have AMI deployed in our service territory, and as well in our control room operations, we do not have a distribution management system yet. So I think part of this journey and discussion for us with our regulators and key stakeholders has been about these foundational investments. You know, we've put it under the umbrella of grid modernization, and you know, we've been fortunate to get some support from our regulators to make those investments. And so we're you know, no decision on AMI deployments yet in our states, but at least, you know, some of these other investments, like starting to move forward with putting in distribution management system and just getting more visibility of what's going on in the grid is key for us. So you know, I would say we're really focused on, you know, trying to figure out what those key investments are and making those in our system, in our company.
And Aftab, we're not that unlike you. We also don't have smart grid. We have 4 million residents in Los Angeles that we're serving. But again, it's that balance and that trade-off trying to, you know, we have the aging infrastructure, we have voltage issues, we have, you know, in the face of these rising loads, we have you know, trying to harden our system to make it more robust and resilient. We have wildfire mitigation that we're looking for here too. And so we have, you know, typically set rate increases and trying to balance, you know, do you do those infrastructure reliability projects or do you deploy smart meter, which are pretty expensive. So, you know, we are doing the distribution automation right now, trying to get the backbone installed, so that in the future it'll allow for the smart meter technology to be layered on top of that. But again, one of our challenges is we frequently see a one-size-fits-all regulation or legislative mandate, not recognizing that although the grid is interconnected and we all can impact each other, each system is different. And so upgrading, you know, LADWP operates at a pretty low voltage on the distribution system. We're 4.8 kV. So many others are 16 or higher. So we have many challenges downtown. You've all been downtown and seen how crowded it is, and trying to serve reliable service in those conditions is challenging in the middle of the summer. Especially as we've seen more prolonged heat waves. We've seen longer heat waves into, you know, October, November, with higher loads, and also it doesn't cool off in the evenings, which places more on our system that typically is used to cooling down. So that, I think, is one of the external challenges that can be problematic. But there's also a lot of opportunities when we think about our workforce. You know, we have a very skilled, we're very fortunate, as many of you are, I'm sure. We have a workforce that is, we do everything. Just about everything is in-house. We don't outsource a lot of it. And so that's helped us during COVID. We've been able to manufacture a lot of the stuff you couldn't get through the supply chain. We're also looking at hydrogen. So we know we have the clean future. And so one of our coal plants, we're going to kind of from a 1800 megawatt coal plant down to an 840 megawatt hydrogen enabled plant in 2025. So it'll enable 30% hydrogen, green hydrogen, that we will manufacture right there at the our renewable hub right in Delta, Utah, to source fuel for the plant with a scale up to 100%. So I also mentioned our existing transmission network. Well, we're also cognizant to get to 100%, we're highly urban, so it's going to require transmission to, you know, bring transmission from resource-rich areas into load centers. And of course, there are a lot of external challenges with transmission, siting, permitting, cost allocation, et cetera, between neighboring states, et cetera, that will make this a real challenge that needs to be solved, so that we can get the deployment of transmission and builds out that's needed to get to the high levels of renewables that the states are contemplating.
Yeah, those are all very, very true and fair. And I think where we all have to continue to focus, and I know we do, we really have the opportunity here at an industry level, you know, to see decentralization happen, which allows for new solutions that will meet the unique needs of our customers. You know, in the past, you know, it's been one level of service, and that's not going to be adequate in the future. And so that decentralization allows customers to make those choices that help fit their service needs. We've also got the democratization of the system, which allows new participants to come in, allows for these innovations to happen. And then, of course, decarbonization and just contributing to that overall cleaner environment and those goals. But at the heart of the challenge, it comes down to that triple constraint. You know, how do we make sure that we manage the expectations of the many stakeholders that are involved in these decisions? How do we make sure we're making good and prudent decisions around cost and effectively managing our charge there, and keeping in mind the many types of customers that we have, some who are willing to pay more for a greener system, and some who don't have the capability to do so. And how do we make sure we're meeting all of the needs of those customers?
Jeff, I want to, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to jump in here and say I appreciate the supply side focus that all you have to deal with, and these are very real problems that we see in microcosm in my own region, because I've got such a big diverse service territory. We have utilities who are almost all in varying stages of AMI development and renewable energy absorption. So we've got kind of a sampling of everything that you guys have described. I just want to put a pitch in for the end use side of the meter in terms of consideration. I mentioned earlier that I've been doing this for 40 years, and over those 40 years in the Northwest, we have essentially saved the equivalent of the hydroelectric system average output now, which is a pretty amazing accomplishment. We many of you may know that we deferred a construction of 4 nuclear power plants out of 5 back in the 90s, and those cooling towers are sitting there just collecting rainwater right now. And we were able to do that because we focused on, in our regional planning, we looked at what is the most cost-effective way to meet future energy needs, and energy efficiency. And again, I'm beating a drum that you all are well aware of, and each of your regions has done well on this. But energy efficiency has done an amazing job for the Northwest, and I think for the country over the last several decades. The question is, what can we do going forward on the end use side that's a complementary development to what you're doing on the grid side? And I think the future, to me, is really exciting about, we see new developments in technology for energy efficiency that come along with the capability to be what I will describe as flexible loads. Not only are they efficient, but they are able to move around in time to when they put that load on the system. And interestingly, the more efficient, the more likely it is that we can actually shift more forward or backwards in time in terms of load placement. And so I think there's we're at a very interesting point in time where, as we look at those capital expenditures that we're all trying to figure out how to best use the ratepayer dollars, some of it may be that it's on the end use side of the meter where it actually saves them money on their energy bill, but gives you a flexible asset to move around in order to maximize the existing system that you have without capital upgrades.
So Jeff, I'll add
go ahead.
One comment to that. I do appreciate and absolutely agree on the end use side, but it's also very important that we not leave behind the disadvantaged communities, the multi-unit dwellings, the renters. It's a real challenge to get to those folks that arguably many need the help the most.
Correct. Yeah.
Because they're not the landlord, it's difficult to get those. So it's important to have programs that also address that.
And Jeff, one issue I've heard in other regions when there's such a large focus on behind the meter is the visibility and the control. And so what's your response in those instances?
So, and I'm behind the meter for me means the actual end use loads themselves: water heating, space cooling, lighting, etc., motors and pumps. The new technologies that we're seeing coming forward are integration of controls, communication, and protocols into the controls, the device as it's purchased. My poster child example right now is electric water heaters. So we've been working for a long time on heat pump water heaters, which are twice as efficient as a standard electric resistance water heater. But in order for that load to be placed on the system, especially in electrification scenarios where it's going into a grid that didn't have that load before, it's really not acceptable to dump 4.5 kilowatts per water heater on a system that wasn't designed for it per dwelling unit. So what we're looking at and have implemented here in Washington and Oregon, and now in California in Title 24 the new construction requirements, is a requirement for a set of controls to be built into any electric water heater at a fairly low cost that includes the opportunity to have communication directly with the network. The device has some autonomy. It can know, it can operate on its own without being directly connected to the grid. But if the grid is connected to it, the grid can ask it to do a number of things, not just get off the grid, but to maybe ramp down its demand, or to ask, could you ramp up your demand in a scenario where we have excess solar? Could we preheat the water heater and then ride through that evening peak that is so famous now, the duck curve? These products are smart enough that they should be able to do that and still survive and deliver the customer value that they're there for in the first place.
That's fascinating. Thank you. Julienne, I wanted to touch upon something that you mentioned, which is digitalization. How are you using digitalization really to address this dynamic marketplace?
Well, you know, with the marketplace, I mean, we're really, we are somewhat removed in Houston from it and not acting as a retail electric provider. But we do, you know, supply the information about usage to a portal where the retail electric providers can access that information and use the information if they want to create differentiating services for their customers. But, you know, I think that the digitalization opportunities abound. And, you know, I mean, I just think today, you know, you think about the ways some digitalization has transformed some industries, everything, simple stuff from payments, you know, how payment information is shared. You know, I hope that there will be opportunities to digitalize further information that we can share and create more efficient methods to do so. You know, as I mentioned, you know, data is really kind of the crux of this transformation. And one of our speakers earlier was also speaking about that, the gentleman from Accenture. And so digitalization of the information that we receive about what is coming onto the grid, what things are happening there, the information about that, it's going to be critical to continuing to operate a safe and reliable grid and maintaining the stability that's required. And so I think digitalization has the biggest opportunity in helping us manage that information in a cost-effective way. You know, we've heard about the challenges associated with big data and costs that can be associated with that. And I think digitalization has the potential to be the solution to help with that particular issue.
Terrific, thank you. Anyone else kind of taking a digitalization strategy?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point. I mean, we you know, as we start to put more sensors, you know, our goal, I think, Michele, you kind of commented about visibility. You know, I think the future grid with all these, you know, devices will start feeding in a whole lot of data. And we're starting to see that already. I mean, we're, you know, even though we don't have AMI, we have a lot of smart devices out there, and we got line sensors and reclosers, and, you know, we got a lot of data coming back. And, you know, unfortunately today, a lot of that data just goes into, you know, whatever data lake somewhere, and, there it is. And if we have an incident, then somebody goes through and figures out what happened. So, we've invested in some resources now to try to, develop some analytics around, using that data that we have. I think we're starting to see some success with that. Another example is, we've started using drones, I think like a lot of utilities, for doing inspections. And, we find that, again, a drone can collect all kinds of high quality images of your transmission and distribution system. But then if you got to have somebody who's going to sit there and go through each image and look for what's right and what's wrong, I mean, it's just not efficient. So, we're starting to work on some machine learning. Again, I think a lot of people in the industry are starting to look at that. Can you train algorithms to look at images and automatically find some abnormalities? So we're starting to see some success with that for our T&D system. So yeah, no, I think there's a huge potential opportunity for the industry to leverage a lot of data and images.
Interesting.
And I would just add the same thing. I think digitization is going to be a really key piece of our future. I think with so many behind the meter, front of the meter, the whole resource mix is changing. The supply side, demand side, both of those, intermittency. I think impacts to the grid are going to be happen a lot more in real time. So you'll absolutely have to have a digital solution. We need low latency. We need automatic responses. And so, that type of technology will be critical in the future to provide that situational awareness, the visibility that was previously discussed. But we also have to be cognizant with all of that, the increase in cybersecurity, and so other challenges that also have to be mitigated, as well as we know we're an integrated grid. And so that situational awareness is even more important, as the pace of adoption between utilities will differ, but yet we're interconnected and can impact each other. So it's going to be very important that there's a digital solution to help manage both the transmission side and the distribution side as we get more and more resources on the distribution side.
Terrific, thank you. So switching gears slightly, what are we missing? Technologies, policies, financing? If you were king or queen for a day, where would you start?
Yeah, I have a long list, so I'll hit some key things, and it's probably policy and some politics more than anything else. But I think in New England, it's so hard to build any major infrastructure. So the whole siting and permitting process. It is important to have stakeholder involvement in things. We had which we thought was a beautiful project, and a high voltage DC transmission line from, Canada, bring clean hydro into the region. It would complement solar and wind very nicely. Massachusetts even selected that project as, through an RFP process. And unfortunately, we just couldn't get through the siting process in New Hampshire. And we had to abandon the project. So, I think that, not that, every enabler here is going to be a major infrastructure project, but I do think that infrastructure is going to be an important part of this. And yes, we try to leverage existing rights of way, maximize existing infrastructure, but there will be a need for new infrastructure to support, all this growth. And somehow, we got to figure out a way to, move these major projects forward a bit faster. Again, I'm not saying cut out stakeholders, we need that, but there's got to be a way to move that faster. And then the other challenge, which not necessarily, an Eversource issue, but, we are in a region that has a wholesale market, energy and capacity market, the ISO New England. And so unfortunately, their tool today as it stands is they run a market, basically, which is good. Markets are good. But then there's a lot of policy resources that are coming onto the system, right? And, we as a region, I think, are, trying to figure out how do we make those two work together better, right? The market and the policy resources, to have a little bit more coordination there. So I think those are just two examples which are more on the I think a bit more on the policy side than anything else.
What are you all seeing in other regions in terms of what's missing?
So I think we talked about it earlier. I think we need, lack of a better word, a resiliency valve as we go through this transition. And those are specific analysis, studies that look at reliability, look at resiliency. And so you can course correct before you get to that point of no return where there won't be an easy fix. And so I think it's really important that we do this in a measured and deliberative fashion so we understand and can see the impacts, which is very difficult because they may not, those extreme events appear to be happening more frequently, but they don't happen every year. So you may not see it right away, but because the change of the pace of change is so rapid, those impacts can materialize quickly for many different components that will impact your reliability. The other thing was the ensuring that those customers that are most impacted and from an energy poverty or an economic perspective are taken care of during this transition. And it's also important that we look at the role of natural gas because it has been so important getting us here. And as we transition off, we need to do that in the right pace. That may go back to the resiliency valve and the one size fits all rate policy making, and ensuring that we have the safeguards in place to ensure we don't get to the place that we're all fearing that if we go too fast without doing it in the correct format. And then the other thing Aftab and others have talked about is the transmission build-outs and the competing policies and states and benefits versus burdens and cost impacts. And those clearly are things that need to be worked out if we're going to get to where we all want to be, and will require the speed up of what has historically been a very long process. Again, we're not without considering the stakeholders, but there are bureaucratic things that can be streamlined and sped up with specific timelines and deadlines and to respond and to help things move along.
Yeah, not to pile on, but another angle that is related to the same kind of thing that it's being brought up here is, there's a lot of work in Texas and in other places to figure out kind of the role of distributed energy resources, distributed generation resources, EVs, batteries, all of those things and how they work within that marketplace. And, when we have that clarity, that will be very helpful in determining how we can move forward with some of those things. But absent that clarity right now, we're a little bit stuck. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of work going on to try to sort that out. It's just a lot of various stakeholder interests to try to balance. And I think once we get to resolution on what that looks like, it's going to be very helpful to determine how we move forward.
So it sounds like it's not a technology issue, but it's really more of a policy coordination. It's more on this softer side. It's not that we need different technologies in order to achieve this large penetration of renewables, for example.
Well, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say technology is still a very important part of it. I mean, I would just say, I feel like the technology parts of it, I think not that we know everything, but I think we know what the key things are that we need to deal with. It's just, I think some of the policy things tend to be a little bit more challenging to address.
If I could jump in, I totally agree, Aftab. I've seen an awful lot of technology come and go over my career. I'm sure you guys have too. And those problems are almost the easy ones to solve. Mm-hmm. As you mentioned, your interconnect project with Canada, that was a beautiful project from a technology standpoint, using state-of-the-art DC transmission. That would have been amazing. But it's not the technology that's the issue there, right? On the end use side, we have the same issue. I feel like I need to point this out, that our policies around demand management programs have tend to focus on opt-in models where individual consumers have to say, yes, I want to do this. And as we all know, people have many other things to do in their life, and opting into a DR program is not high on their list usually. Here in the Northwest, we've been testing some, I know this is controversial, but I'll just say it, some opt-out models where everybody in a substation area, let's say, is enrolled, and they're given the option to opt out if they want to. But we found that we get very high participation rates, over 75% in an opt-out model. And with those kinds of participation rates, all of a sudden these demand side flexible loads become really significant if we can get those kinds of participation rates. But if we can't get them, and the main thing that's in the way, frankly, is policy. These are challenging. I totally understand the challenges from a policy standpoint of an opt-out model, but the cost reductions that are available with that kind of scale are really significant to both the utility, the end users, and aggregators who might want to be in that market.
Super. I want to there's a couple questions that came over the chat, and I just want to acknowledge them. So Matt McGovern, what about undergrounding transmission as a way to reduce opposition? Would the higher cost be worth it if it keeps projects from being delayed or canceled in the permitting process?
Yeah, so I mean, I could say that the particular project in New Hampshire, we did underground to, not the whole project, but, significant parts of that project to address, concerns in the siting process, but it just wasn't enough. But no, we definitely do look at undergrounding transmission to address opposition and concerns.
We look at that too, and oftentimes that's looked as the solution for reliability, but I can point to 2 years ago over the summer when we had a heat wave. Most of our challenges were downtown LA when it hit 109 degrees, and all our system downtown is underground. And so it becomes really problematic trying to find where this problem is when it's underground, and because of the heat, when it can be 140, 150 degrees down there, you can only have a crew down there for 10 minutes.
Wow.
So it becomes so if everything is working great, that's fine. But if there's challenges, overhead, you can find it pretty easily. And not to mention the cost impacts if you're trying to balance that rates, reliability, and sustainability trifecta, if you will, and what those trade-offs are. In some cases, undergrounding in areas can increase costs 40 times. Is that the best bang? But again, it's a lot of stakeholder outreach, and sometimes that may be the only acceptable solution for certain parts, but there's certainly trade-offs.
Well said. So Mark Frankel, what percentage of loads do utilities really need to manage to address critical peaks and load factor? Certainly not 100%. It seems like there's a misconception that we need to monitor and control everything. Perhaps something like 15 to 20% load control would solve 98% of the problems.
Yeah, from my perspective, I mean, certainly I think the statement that it's not 100%, I mean, I think that's correct. But the only thing I would caution is that, and we see this sometimes going on, is that when you look at an aggregate, load in aggregate, and you say, hey, you want to, like a lot of the, demand response energy efficiency programs, you'll target system-wide peaks, right? Which is good. I think it's important because, in terms of, your whole generation fleet, your peaker plants, you want to minimize their operations. But, the problem that we see as a grid operator is very local. So, we're more concerned about issues on specific feeders, managing voltage profiles, right? Because we have the charter of safe and reliable supply for our customers and our employees, right? And, even, by the way, during storm events, we, from time to time, still, even if it's not supposed to happen, people's distributed resources are backfeeding onto our system. So, which poses a very significant safety risk for us. But, so for us, it's really, the management is more around, on a feeder by feeder level for us. Like I said, voltage profiles, power factors, yeah, I get the point on the aggregate peak management, but for us, it's managing on the feeder level.
Yeah, I agree with that, Aftab. We're seeing the same thing.
And Joe Jankowski, nice to see your name. If the policies are holding back grid innovation, what POCs, proof of concepts, and pilots are these utilities undertaking in the meantime?
Yeah, I can jump in here first. So in our Indiana footprint, we have a small storage and solar installation, and we're using that kind of as a place that we can get to know, the various aspects of that technology, including how, storage can be used to benefit the grid. And we're hoping to, use what we learn from that to help highlight opportunities for that in other markets.
Yeah, and LADWP, again, we have we just commissioned or signed a power purchase agreement for the largest battery and solar combined facility last year for 400 megawatts of solar paired with a 300 megawatt 4-hour battery, so 1,200 megawatt hour battery. In addition to that, we have a couple areas that one that has about 1,000 megawatts in that specific geographic region. So right now we're looking at doing a liquid air energy storage facility there to help with the integration and stability of that specific area. We're also looking at compressed air energy storage. So we're looking at the longer duration storage. We recognize, with the wildfires and, I talked about the Saddle Ridge fire we had last year, a 4-hour battery would not have helped because that was a 12-hour issue. We also had another fire back in 2016 that went into South LA, and if we didn't have generation there, that system would be out for a month while we rebuilt it. And again, there's an equity component there. So it's really, really important that, part of the dialogue, again, thank you, Julienne, is the resiliency. And it's important that we not lose sight of resiliency. Everybody's focused on reliability, but the resiliency piece can have severe, significant impacts on large portions of your customers if this isn't done right.
Well, with the 2 minutes we have left, a challenge. What's the one word that's that kind of is the image for what you all are trying to accomplish, or what's the big takeaway that you want the audience to think about? I know.
Well, I'll jump in. Integration of demand side and supply side in a flexible operations is what I think we need to get to.
Mm.
Yeah, if I had to sum it up in one word, Michelle, I would say balance. We're trying to balance customer expectations and cost, accommodating new solutions with ensuring safety and reliability of the grid, enabling a more transactive platform while respecting the rules of the market in which we operate. And I could go on, but I think achieving that balance is what we're looking to do.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to resilience.
Okay.
We've had a long history of reliable and resilient system. It hasn't been the focus of discussions because it's just we're too good at what we do.
We're too good.
Yeah, and so in the future that will become a real issue if we're not focusing on that during the transition. We will get there at the end, but we have to do it in the right deliberative fashion.
And I'll go with flexible grid.
Okay, awesome. Terrific. Well, thank you all so much. Lots of great points, and I really appreciate all of you for joining me and discussing this for this past hour. And with that, I will bid you adieu and wait for the transition.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
You.
Mr. Hauser, nice to see you.
Hi, Michelle, and thank you and your terrific panel. It was great to hear the differences going on, geographically around the country. We always know that's what's happening, but to hear that diversity, in a panel like that is really eye-opening and certainly informative. So that was a great panel, and we appreciate the work you did to pull that together for us. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Yep, you too. So